Welcome to Hiring to Firing, the podcast. I'm Tracey Diamond, labor and employment attorney at Troutman Pepper, and I'm here with my co-host extraordinaire, Evan Gibbs. Together, we tackle all employment and HR issues from hiring to firing. Today, our special guest is Katie Stark. Katie is Senior Director, Commercial Counsel for Collegium Pharmaceutical. Thanks so much for joining us, Katie.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about Collegium and about your role with the company?
Collegium is a specialty pharmaceutical company committed to improving the lives of people living with serious medical conditions. And I've been with Collegium now for about 2 years, coming from a firm where I primarily focused on litigation and investigations. What I really like about my role at Collegium is that I get to see and do a little bit of everything in my role as commercial counsel. For example, I help to negotiate contracts. I'm part of the team responsible for reviewing the promotional materials for our products. And I also frequently partner with the human resources and compliance teams to conduct trainings, handle employment matters, and internal investigations, things of that nature. While I report directly to our general counsel and am involved in other strictly legal matters, I often find myself collaborating on projects with all parts of the business, which really enables me to become a better strategic advisor to our business.
That's one of the really nice things about in-house is you get to really work on the business side in addition to working with all the outside litigators and other types of lawyers, I would think.
Yes, I surprisingly enjoy working with non-lawyers. It's fun.
I can't imagine why. So tell us a little bit about the employment structure at Collegium in terms of number of employees approximately and where you're spread out.
Sure. We have about 200 employees. The biggest portion of our employee base is in the field. So we have sales representatives in all different parts of the country and different territories. And we have probably about 40 to 50 people located here at the home office.
We're going to do something new today. We thought we'd kick off our topic, which is dress codes in the workplace, with a fun fact. So, Evan, I'm going to start with you. Why don't you tell us what was the weirdest fashion trend you ever embraced or the most embarrassing fashion trend that you used to embrace?
Oh my gosh. It is embarrassing. When I was in about 7th grade, I don't know if y'all remember wide leg jeans. There was a brand called Jinko. Some of my friends and I, we were entrenched in that culture, skateboards, the BMX bikes, and the wide leg pants and all that stuff. And it's really funny because number one, like the pictures I've seen from back then are, oh man, they're so embarrassing. But I recently was driving here in Atlanta downtown and I saw a group of 3 or 4 kids and they were dressed exactly like we used to dress back in the day. So I don't know if you want to call it a style, it's more like a counterculture, I guess, but it is apparently cycled back through.
Never get rid of those wide leg jeans. You never know when they're going to come back.
I guess not. Thank God I did get rid of those things though.
I can't see your whole shirt right now, Evan, but I saw the word pickle on it. You're the third person in the last week that I've seen wearing something having to do with pickles on their shirt.
Really?
I saw someone with a sweatshirt that had all the different kinds of jars of pickles on it the other day. So I think pickles are the fashion trend of fall of 2023.
Apparently so. Yeah, mine says pickle pickle. It's actually a Chick-fil-A shirt. My wife works at Chick-fil-A. It's pickle pickle because on every Chick-fil-A sandwich, there's supposed to be 2 pickles. There are 2, not 3, not 4. You can ask for extra, but the standard sandwich has 2. And they're always supposed to be dating, not mating. So 2 pickles and they're not touching on the sandwich.
Oh, no.
That's right.
That's another fun fact.
That's right. 2 for 1 today.
How about you, Katie? What's your embarrassing fashion trend?
I know that our listeners won't be able to see me, but I've been smiling really hard because I kid you not, that was mine too.
Oh my gosh.
The wide leg jeans. My friends and I, we all had them and they were so long too that they were torn at the end, like they were raggedy.
Yes.
And we also accessorized, maybe Evan, you didn't have the necklace that had the soda can tabs. I don't really know why we were collecting them, but we strung them on a necklace. And that was sort of our, I don't know, grungy, cool teenage phase. But
Yep.
I really cringe when I see those photos of myself from the past.
I'm sure you were looking mighty cool. Well, in terms of workplace clothing, I know one person in particular who for certain brought the concept of work clothes to a new level, and that is Erin Brockovich. Erin Brockovich is a paralegal, consumer advocate, and environmental activist who was behind a famous case against a well known utility company involving groundwater contamination in Hinckley, California, back in 1993. Most of us know her because she was portrayed by Julia Roberts in the movie Erin Brockovich, which premiered in 2000 and carried Miss Roberts on to receive an Academy Award for Best Actress. While this movie and Miss Brockovich's extensive portfolio as a whistleblower could be the subject of numerous workplace topics, including a topic of whistleblowing, and maybe we will tackle that in a future episode, we thought it would be fun to use the movie today to talk about dress codes in the workplace. For those of you who have not seen the movie, and I highly recommend that you do, Ms. Brockovich is portrayed as wearing very tight fitting, low cut shirts and short skirts in the office and in client meetings. At one point, her boss, attorney Ed Mastery, has a conversation with her about it, and let's listen to that clip.
You're a girl.
Excuse me?
Why aren't you out to lunch with the girls? You're a girl.
I guess I'm not the right kind.
Look, now you may want to, now that you're working here, you may want to rethink your wardrobe a little.
Why is that?
Well, I think some of the girls are a little uncomfortable because of what you wear.
Is that so? Well, it just so happens I think I look nice. And as long as I have one ass instead of two, I'll wear what I like, if that's all right with you. You might want to rethink those ties.
So, Evan and Katie, is Erin right that she should be able to wear whatever she pleases?
Well, I think it depends.
Oh, the lawyer's answer, it depends. Depends on what?
I think that first thing is if we're talking about in the workplace, I think the first stop is always the policy. What does the policy say? Is there a policy? Some folks, especially over the course of the pandemic, have relaxed the policies or done away with them. But I think that's kind of the first stop.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with Evan. The first thing I would want to do too is understand like the work culture in addition to the policy. It's clear from the movie and the clip, Erin does a really good job at her job. She's very intelligent. And I don't think it was ever an obstacle to her performing well. But in terms of whether she should be able to wear whatever she wants to the business, I think it's really the tone that the company sets in terms of what's appropriate.
Yeah, some situations it could, sort of self-limit somebody's success or ability to rise in the organization. It may be unfortunate, but the reality is people make a lot of assumptions based on appearances. And a big part of that is, are you well groomed? Are you appropriately dressed? You can be the all-star on the team, but if you're showing up to work in slides and pajama pants, they're just not going to take you as seriously as somebody doing equally well, but also presenting themselves in a professional and adult way, I think.
It's interesting because on the one hand, watching Erin Brockovich as portrayed by Julia Roberts in the field, relating and trying to pull together more plaintiffs for the class action, it seemed to me that the way she was dressing was helping her to relate to those, more of the blue collar workers that were out in these homes. On the other hand, I think it could be really an obstacle to her when she was relating to another law firm that they brought in to help with the case. And I don't recall whether she actually went to court in the movie, but if she wore those kind of clothing in court, that could really be a problem. Let me start with this. When Erin saw the movie, according to director Steven Soderbergh, she said that the only thing that was inaccurate is that the skirts weren't short enough. So, in her mind, she saw clothing as this feminine statement, but I'm wondering whether there are concerns about sex harassment if an employee comes to work wearing clothing that's tight fitting or low cut. Does a woman bear any responsibility for what might happen if they come to work wearing those kind of clothes? What do you think?
I think that's a tough one because there's this unconscious bias about, sexualizing a woman based on what she's wearing. Because like in the alternative, if a male coworker showed up with shorts that might be a little bit above the knee, I don't think we would worry about him being sexually harassed. We don't want to treat employees differently, but I think that if someone came to work wearing something provocative or inappropriate, I don't know. That's really a challenging one. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Oh, I don't know if I'm going to touch that one.
I'm always putting Evan in this position.
I'm a white dude in 2023. I don't know if I should say anything on this topic. I will just say I will talk more about industry than company specific issues. I could talk about guys dressing like that at work. I will say this on the record for the recording. My candid opinion is that men's shorts have gotten entirely too short for my taste. And sometimes some of the shorts I see guys wearing, I'm like, man, I hope you would never show up to play golf with a client in those shorts, because I think it's borderline inappropriate to me. I think that, like we were talking about earlier, it can be very situation specific. And her being able to relate to clients dressing a certain way, blue collar folks, I think that is something I can definitely relate to and speak on. I'll routinely have to go to client sites and meet with clients or do a site inspection or something like that. In the most recent one, I went to a manufacturing facility and I wore work boots, jeans, flannel shirt, and a hat. You know, it's not something I would wear to the Troutman office, but it was entirely appropriate for what I was doing that day. It would have been really weird and out of place if I'd have shown up in a suit. So I think it's all very situation specific. There's got to be some judgment involved.
I do the same thing. If I'm going to give a presentation at a manufacturing facility, I'm not going to walk in there in my suit. I think that'll just make it really hard to relate to my audience. But if I'm going to court, I'm definitely going to wear a suit. So I do put some thought into what's professional for that particular place that I'm going to that day. From a sex harassment point of view, I think we should make it clear nothing that a woman wears to work ever gives a green light for a woman or a man to sexually harass that person who wore the inappropriate work attire. I think HR has the job of having to handle professionalism in the workplace in terms of what people wear to work, separately from professionalism in the workplace and people doing the right thing in terms of not making inappropriate comments or worse, physical touching or other types of behavior that could rise to the level of sex harassment.
One issue that I've heard come up a lot that listeners may be encountering is during the pandemic, we had a relaxing of a lot of dress codes, especially, folks working from home. If you're off camera, you can really wear whatever you want. But with folks returning to the office more and more, I've heard several folks at different companies talk about people are really pushing back on what used to be the standard dress code. Some companies are pushing right back and saying, no, you can't wear sneakers to the office, for example. You can't wear, for example, ladies can't wear yoga pants. Guys can't wear ripped jeans, stuff like that.
I would think that companies are so happy just to have people back in the office. This is sort of the next level of getting people to dress properly.
Yeah.
But I think you bring up a good point, Evan, about the shifting times and what is considered appropriate attire for the workplace 30 years ago is not necessarily what's required or needed or expected now. I was just watching Lessons in Chemistry, the series on Apple TV that's based on this book that everybody had been talking about over the past year. There's a scene in that where the protagonist is wearing pants. She's a woman and she's in the 1950s and she's on TV. She comes out from behind a counter and she's wearing pants and the whole audience gasps because she has pants on. And then she's talking to her neighbor afterwards about how she feels like she's really making a difference because she got away with wearing pants on TV that day. It's just interesting. I remember, this is showing my age, but I remember the days when going to court in a pantsuit was not considered acceptable.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I also found it fascinating when I was in law school and we were getting the guidance department or a professional development team preparing us for interviews with big firms. They told us, if you're a female, make sure you wear nylons. I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like we're still talking about nylons. Another little anecdotal story that you just reminded me of, Tracey, is when I was a newer associate at a big firm and I was in a big conference room that had windows with several partners. Another younger female associate walked by and she was wearing hot pink high heels. And the female partners that were at the conference room looked at each other and shook their heads, which was just so interesting to me because sometimes I think those small things you don't realize are perceived as being different or out of the norm are being picked up on, and you can be judged and maybe thought of as less professional, when in reality, I think the shoes are fine. I actually liked them. It's just different ways of thinking about what the work environment or culture should be. In this case, a law firm, which is a little bit more conservative, I think.
And what it should be in that particular point in time, because to your nylon's point, that was sort of a requirement back in the day, but I'm not really sure anymore these days what's expected or not expected as far as nylons go. If anything, I think you look maybe more of an older generation if you're wearing them. You have to keep on top of the shifting workplace norms too.
Yeah, I got a sort of a similar anecdote. For the longest time, I continued to wear ties. I would wear suit pants, button-up shirt with a tie, and I continued doing that for a really long time. In 2017 or so, 2018, I was actually with my mentor at this firm. I won't name him. He knows I tell the story all the time. We were going to a client lunch one time, and I was wearing what I typically wear, which I thought was appropriate for a client lunch, the slacks, shirt, tie. And we get to the restaurant and we're about to get out of his car. And he says, all right, you got to leave that tie in the car. I was really surprised. There was no sort of lead up to this. It was out of the blue. You got to leave that tie in the car. And I was like, what do you mean I got to leave the tie in the car? And he said, well, you look like a copy boy. And so you got to take the tie off. Nobody wears ties anymore. You got to leave the tie in the car. So from that day on, I stopped wearing the tie. And I guess I got current with the times. But yeah, so
bow ties for you, Evan.
Yeah, the dress code has definitely evolved just in the last several years.
It is. And I think that going back to what we were discussing earlier, it's all about your audience too and who you're interacting with. One thing that I found in-house is if I have, an interview or I'm talking to someone I haven't met before, early on, I thought, okay, well, I should wear my suit coat because I'm a lawyer for the company and I want them to know that. But I feel like sometimes it's very off-putting. If the lawyer's there, they might think that it's more of a serious situation than it's not. I'm just there to gather information or hear about how something is working or what's not working. And I think sometimes the traditional lawyer suit and tie or whatnot, that can be very off-putting. And I think what Erin Brockovich worked in her favor and going and getting all of those plaintiffs to talk about was in the clothes that I think that they could relate to, that she looked like a daughter, sister, friend versus being associated for a law firm.
At the end of the day, you don't really want people to notice what you're wearing in this context. You want them to listen to what you have to say. I actually tell my daughter this all the time, in terms of the college life of what you wear on the weekends. Just keep that in mind that those same classmates are going to be in the classroom with you on Monday and you want to be taken seriously during the week. So from a perspective even of off-duty attire, I guess we could analogize that too. If you're going to be, in a social situation with people that you work with, you want to keep that in mind as well. I want to turn to sort of the HR perspective, though. Somebody comes to work, you're head of HR, and that person's wearing really provocative clothing or something that's just not professional or inappropriate for the workplace. How do you handle that kind of conversation?
I'll tell you a really funny story. Directly on this point, a relative of mine was telling me over Thanksgiving, we hosted Thanksgiving, and she was telling me that she manages a huge team. She's got managers under her, but I guess her total team is like 150 people that she manages. And she was telling me that she had to have a conversation with this particular employee because I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 separate instances, they would have these huge team calls. There'd be like 50 or 60 people on the call. And so I guess she didn't realize that her camera was on or she thought that it would be buried in the frames of the Zoom meeting and no one would see it. But she apparently, they were having this meeting and she got up, to go do something, didn't have pants on a couple of different times.
Oh my gosh.
So this is somebody that works exclusively from home. So this relative of mine had to, have a one-on-one meeting and say, look, you've got to wear pants when you're having a call, whether or not you think you're going to stand up.
I'm sure your relative was thinking, I never thought I would ever have to have this kind of conversation. The words that are coming out of my mouth, I never thought I'd have to say them. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that qualifies as provocative clothing, maybe unintentionally. Well, I don't know if it was provocative or not, but it was something. But yeah, so I think that's the first thing is you've got to have just sort of it can be a sensitive topic, I think, so you maybe kind of have a soft approach.
I think there's a spectrum too of behaviors or outfits. In that case, Tracey, to your point, you should know wearing pants is preferred and appropriate versus if someone comes in one day with a skirt that might be perceived as too short or a lower cut top, that's a little bit I think, more challenging, but I think it's a delicate conversation that HR should have. But before going into that conversation, being mindful of the culture, the policy, like, did we set the expectations? Is this employee doing this, consistently, or was this just a one-off day? And maybe I have too soft of an approach on that, but I think, embracing differences and encouraging expression can be good in the workplace. And those are two of like our core values at Collegium. But there's a line that would, of course, need to be drawn if someone is dressing in a manner that's inconsistent with those core values or distracting to others.
Yeah, and also making sure that, you're treating folks consistently across the
Yeah.
organization, which in large organizations, if you got a smaller company, it's not that big of a deal, not hard to manage. But if you're in a really big organization, you've got hundreds of employees in one or more locations, that can be a real sort of logistical problem, making sure that everybody's aligned on that. So I think that's probably a good first step before you even maybe have a conversation with folks is, if you're in a larger HR department, talk to your counterparts and confirm that we're all aligned on what's appropriate and what's not, and that, everybody's going to be treated the same way.
Now, both of you have mentioned that point, and I think it's a really good one, that it's really important to not be singling people out, particularly people of different protected categories, whether it's gender or race or some other protected category, and holding people to a different standard. Kind of curious what you think about the having the difficult conversation part, and how do you actually have that conversation? And I actually think this could be a great podcast topic for down the road is, how do you have difficult HR conversations in general? Somebody who's coming to work wearing, shall we say, unprofessional clothing, but is provocative, that's an awkward conversation, just like someone who has body odor or someone's making weird noises or what have you. And HR often will get stuck with the actual communication to that employee. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how best to approach it.
Well, I could tell you two things. The first point I'll throw out there is a friend of mine had to have a conversation with somebody about body odor. And this person was a manager, did not work in HR, had no HR training, but HR didn't want to have the conversation. So I said, you manager, we've prepared a memo. They called it something like the freshness doctrine or something like that. It had some like kooky title. And they were like, here's like a written memo about body odor you've got to give to this employee. And you've got to talk to him about this body odor. And this friend of mine is a female and the employee was a male. I mean, you talk about like awkward on so many different levels. I mean, don't do that for the love of the Lord. Don't stick some, manager having this really difficult conversation, HR folks. Be a part of this conversation with them, or if you don't do it on your own. But I think just sort of throwing some softballs in there like, hey, I just wanted to talk through with you the dress code here in the office. I'm not singling you out and I'm not picking on you. We don't want to make you feel bad about yourself or anything, but here's a particular item that we as a company don't necessarily permit within the confines of our dress code. And, you're kind of pushing that line. And so we want to talk about appropriate clothing for the workplace. That may be a fair lead in, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what my thoughts were too. I think the HR team, at least here at Collegium, very professional, but also caring too. Like making sure the employee knows we care about you and we want to tell you this thing because it's an issue or causing an issue in the workplace. And we want to help you rise above that challenge.
We want you to be successful.
Exactly. So I think that's a good way of approaching it too, because it is very awkward and unpleasant. And I feel like most of the time, the recipients of the feedback just have no idea and will make the improvement or change the behavior if someone talks to them about it in a professional and I think
empathetic.
Caring. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I would add to that I probably would just acknowledge the awkwardness of it, rather than leave it as sort of the elephant in the room and just say, I have to have a conversation with you that's a little bit awkward, but I'm having this conversation with you because I care about you as an employee and I want you to succeed here. And this is some things that we're noticing or we're getting complaints about. And I want to bring it to your attention. And then launch from there or kick it to HR so that we don't have to do it. Okay, last question I have, and an important one is in terms of policy drafting. From a legal compliance standpoint, are there certain things that employers should watch out for when putting together a dress code Some that came to mind is just laws about things like hairstyle, religious accommodation. Do you guys have thoughts on that?
I was thinking this along the same lines. Like, you wouldn't want to have a policy skewed to be, more restrictions or more burdensome on females versus males. And of course, all of the taking into account the exemptions and maybe being clear about the process or mechanism. For example, and I'm just making this up, but if no hats are allowed and someone wants to wear a headscarf or a hijab, then I think there's a way that would be permissible exception to the policy, but there should be a way for them to know that and to talk with HR.
Yeah, things get really complicated. I've seen this happen where religious accommodation requests like a headscarf may be conflicting with, let's say, safety requirements in a manufacturing facility where you can't have anything flowing around that might get caught in equipment. So, not always the easiest things to navigate, but certainly areas that you have to keep in mind to maintain compliance with the law.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, listen, this was a super fun conversation, and I'm excited to see what your next fashion trend choice is in the future, Katie and Evan.
Well, Tracey, to be fair, we didn't hear your worst
Good point.
fashion
Good point, Evan.
mistake. We both shared our darkest fashion secrets.
Well, I
Tracey,
was hoping
so-
to get away with it, but you caught me. I would say that as a kid, flash dance was really big, and those leg warmers were a very big thing then. So I had a pair of pink ones. Yeah. And they got really dirty and kind of gross, but I wore them anyway. So anyway, well, this has been super fun, guys. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Don't forget to check out our blog, hiringtofiring.law, and tune in to hear our other podcast episodes and tell us what you think. Love to hear some ideas out there. Thanks so much for listening.
Copyright Troutman Pepper Hamilton Sanders, LLP. These recorded materials are designed for educational purposes only. This podcast is not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual participants. Troutman Pepper does not make any representations or warranties, express or implied, regarding the contents of this podcast. Information on previous case results does not guarantee a similar future result. Users of this podcast may save and use the podcast only for personal or other non-commercial educational purposes. No other use, including, without limitation, reproduction, retransmission, or editing of this podcast may be made without the prior written permission of Troutman Pepper. If you have any questions, please contact us at troutman.com.